Hey, it's Daniel from GurrierMusicStudio.com, and in this video, I want to show you how to start a group lesson program in 3 weeks. To the point, I'm going to be giving you a checklist of actions you need to do and decisions you need to make so that you can start a successful group lesson program. Believe it or not, you might be more ready than you think to start this. And I base this opinion on the fact that over the past 5 years, I've helped about 400 studios convert to a multi-level group system. And really the points of this video, the checklist I'm going to give you, a 7-point checklist, is based on questions that I would ask those studio owners when I first met with them. I'd ask these questions because I was trying to assess if they were a good fit for our group lesson training or not. And it just occurred to me, why is it taking me so long to make a video like this where I kind of reveal what those 7 questions are, what those 7 things that you need to consider are. I think this will be very helpful for someone who's been on the fence about starting a group lesson program or maybe downright scared about starting a group lesson program. So, I'm going to give this checklist to you in just a second, but first, basically I want to start with a smaller list so that you can decide if this video is going to be relevant for you or not. This video will be relevant for you if you want to start an in-person or an online group. So if that's you, then this will be relevant to you. This will definitely be relevant to you if you are a single teacher studio or perhaps a studio that only has a couple teachers in it. This video will be relevant to you. And this video will be very relevant to you if you personally want to teach the groups and you really don't have a desire maybe to go over 100 or 150 students. This video is going to be very relevant to you. Now, if you are a larger studio, or you do want to get much bigger someday, there might be a better option for you. And if that's the case, I'm going to be releasing some videos more towards the end of spring and summer about that. But, you know, to be honest, I've seen studios take the action points that I'm going to give you here and run with it and have a very, very successful group program. A studio in Orlando, Florida comes to mind that had about 300 piano students that they converted over to group. A studio in Sydney, Australia that had 400 students, and they started a multi-level group program for several different instruments in their school. Piano, guitar, voice, drums I think as well. They did group drum lessons. So it's still relevant to you, but it's going to be very relevant to you if you're those 3 things that I mentioned earlier. Now before we jump into the checklist, I do want to give a very brief biography as to how I came to know all this stuff. I've been teaching groups for over a decade and a half. I started in the early days with a summer camp that I co-invented with a friend of mine. We'd see 24 kids at a time, and we literally had, at any given time during the day, we had children on 12 pianos. So we had a group of 12 that was were on the instruments, and we had a group of 12 that were doing an activity or were learning or maybe having a snack, and we would just switch those kids throughout the day. There was the A group and the B group. So I started teaching group in groups of 24. Later, I invented a multi-level group system where I taught 5 kids at a time, but you know that could have gone up to even 6, 7, or 8 kids at a time. I just personally chose to teach 5 at a time. But that's kind of how I came to know what I'm telling you about here. And having said that, let's just jump into the checklist now. So again, these are 7 things that you need to do or think about, make a decision on before you can start a group program. And honestly, once you've gone through this checklist, I think you're going to be ready to go. So the first thing on your checklist is you need to make sure you have the space to actually do the group program. At the very least, you need to have a 12 by 12 room. I personally taught in my house. I had a 12 by 12 room, could see 5 kids on pianos in that room. Now, if you're teaching a different instrument like guitar, you could have I've seen guitar teachers have a circle of students, and they don't need even that much space just because they have their guitar and they're, sitting down and playing. Sometimes the kids would stand or the students would stand. Think physically about the space that you will need to prepare to have your group lesson program. And that could get down to just measuring the size of the instruments that you have so you know you have the correct amount of floor space. So that's pretty easy. And honestly, that's a major hurdle for most people, just knowing where they're going to do it. So once you have that out of the way, I think you're good. So that's your first one, space. Secondly, you need to decide how many students you're going to have in one group. This is pretty easy. I mean, it's just as simple as writing down the number you want, but let me give you some wisdom here so you can make a good decision. I found that most teachers who are beginning to teach group do best when they only have 3 or 4 kids to manage at first. Personally, when I invented the way of teaching that I use in my own group system, I started with 4 kids. I tried to get 4 kids in a group. I bought 4 instruments, had them come in. And at first it was kind of challenging, but over time I got used to seeing that many kids at once, and I increased to 5. Could have increased to 6. I just didn't have the room to do it and really didn't want to change up my teaching situation. Didn't want to have to rent an external location. I really liked just being able to teach in my house. So that's the wisdom I would give you there. So that's the second one. So first is space. Second is how many students in one group. Third, you need to decide the age range or the demographic of the student you want to teach. I found that most teachers teach kids. I personally taught kids, and I found, again, at the beginning when I was first teaching, it was a little bit of a challenge to teach a kid younger than 6. In fact, I even struggled with some six-year-olds. As I got more skilled, as I got better at teaching the group, I decreased the age at which I would take a new student. I took a lot of 5-year-olds in the last 5 years that I taught group, and had no problems there. Is it possible to do adult groups? I get this question all the time. Absolutely. You can teach adults just as easily as you can teach kids. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to teach the adults. They can be a little bit more self-directed. They have more self-control, hopefully. So they'll sit at the piano and actually do their work in that group environment. So totally and perfectly fine to teach adults in group. Can this be done online? Another question I get asked quite a bit. Absolutely. And I found that teaching online, you don't really have to worry about the age range there either. If you can do it in person, you can do it online. So that's the third one. You have to decide what's the age range of student that you want to work with. Fourth, this one's a little more challenging, but you need to get your equipment and even decide what equipment you're going to use. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of, which particular piano I used at which part of my career. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this video. But I will say this, there are some general things that you're going to need. You're going to need, if you're teaching piano, stands, a digital instrument, a bench, and any teacher would use, an iPad. If you are doing a stringed instrument or guitar, you'll need a chair, you'll need a music stand, you'll need an amp more than likely for the guitar so that they can plug in. And that's really the big one that I hadn't mentioned yet. Whatever instrument you're choosing to teach, you're going to need an instrument, a digital instrument that you can plug in. The particular way that I think is easiest for a single teacher studio to get into group lesson teaching is to do it in a multi-level group. And I'm going to talk about that more in point number 5. But if you're teaching a multi-level group, that means kids aren't working on the same music. This child might be in level 2, but this child over here is in level 3. They're not working on the same songs. So they need to have their own lesson experience, and the only way that you can guarantee that you're going to give them their own lesson experience is if you've got headphones on them and they're working on their own. So make sure that you have good, high-quality instruments for whatever instrument you're teaching, and make sure those instruments can be plugged in. So that's the 4th point, leading me to the 5th point, the 5th decision that needs to be made, which is curriculum. Now, here's the thing about that. About 6 months ago from when I'm making this video, I made another video called Do Not Use a Group Curriculum to Teach Group. And some people misunderstood the point of that video. They thought I was saying don't teach group. No, I was saying don't use a group curriculum. If you're a small single teacher studio or a smaller studio under 100 students, don't really want to get much bigger than 100, maybe 125, 150 students, do not use a traditional group curriculum because, and I'm just giving a summary of that video, you really should go watch that one. It's a really great video. It's been very helpful to a lot of people. But the brief summary of that video is that the problem for a smaller studio in using a traditional group curriculum is that almost every traditional group curriculum in the world groups the kids by the level that they're in. Well, this causes all kinds of headaches and actually does a disservice to the kids in terms of the educational quality that you can deliver to those kids. There's a better alternative, and that is to use a multi-level group. If you do use a multi-level group, what I'd recommend that you do in terms of your curriculum is actually use whatever you're using now to teach one-on-one lessons. So for me, I used Hal Leonard and Faber to teach one-on-one. So when I invented my multi-level group system, I figured out a way to teach those one-on-one methods in a group format. And I did it in a way that, this child here wasn't impacted by this child over here. They were having their own unique and separate experience. And I came up with a whole series of rules and best practices so that I could successfully manage the time in the group, successfully manage the kids, have good classroom control, and get great educational outcomes, as evidenced by the fact that I had kids 60% of my studio in any given year would participate in the Royal Conservatory of Music assessments, and they come back with great scores, had kids getting the highest score in the state for their level, so I did not have to sacrifice educational quality just because they were in a group and having their own kind of unique experience. Some people scratch their head at that. They're like, well, if they're in a group, why not lean on that format and have a more social, fun experience for the kids? And there are ways to do that, but for me personally, and just the way that I chose to teach and the objectives that I had for my studio, I really like to just keep the kids focused on learning repertoire and making sure they were doing it in an efficient manner and doing it with great expression and great musicality. So that's the fifth one. Make a decision on your curriculum. But the good news there, like I said, is you can just use whatever you're using now, provided that you're willing to teach in a multi-level format, which is really what I recommend for teachers. If you're a larger studio, as I mentioned earlier, I have a different recommendation. With a larger student base, you actually have a lot more options in terms of what you do, and I have a specific recommendation that I'm not going to make in this video. I'm going to probably make a separate video for that, but I have a specific recommendation if you're a larger studio as defined by, let's say you're over 150 students, something that's way more efficient, and actually it's possible you can even see 24 kids an hour with the solution that I'm thinking about. But again, that's for a different video. So that was the fifth one, your curriculum. The sixth is execution. When are you actually going to do this? And I want to give you a series of steps that you can follow to get this thing off the ground in 3 weeks, like I promised at the outset. So step one, look at the calendar and decide when you want to start this thing. Whether it's 3 weeks from today, or the end of the school year, or this upcoming fall, whenever it is, decide the date that you absolutely want to start. And then what you do is work backwards from there. And that kind of leads me to step two. And that is the biggest hurdle you're going to experience in converting is actually getting parents on board. So what you want to do is kind of plan out a multi-week process where you invite parents into this, educate them on it, and secure their loyalty, secure their excitement so that you can do this group transition smoothly. This is by far the biggest hurdle to switching to group. So many teachers that I talk to, their biggest fear is this component of it. And not to put too fine a point on it, part of how we've helped 400 studios convert to group is that we've given them email templates, scripts, messaging that really, really works in getting parents on board a group program. And that is something that we teach in our group lesson training. Just look somewhere around this video, you'll find information about that. But there is another free resource I created called How to Fill Your Group Lesson Program. And I do give some really good marketing ideas about how to fill your group program in that PDF. You can download that for free. There's no cost for that. And I'll probably include that also somewhere around this video on a blog post or in a description box somewhere or in a comment. But that's step two. So you just need to kind of plan out that conversion process. And usually you want to spread that out over a couple weeks where you're inviting parents into it, you're securing their commitment to the program, and then you're following up with them. And this is step three, actually getting them on your schedule. So you actually need to schedule all these kids now. Now, if you're taking my advice and doing a multi-level group, this is not going to be a headache at all. If you have 40 kids and you've got to get all your level ones at Tuesday at 5:30 and all your level twos at Tuesday at 6:30 and all your level threes, it becomes a mess. But if it's multi-level, you literally just decide the slots you want to work and then just give people choice as to where they want to park into your schedule and then just write them in. And when that one fills up, you take that away as an option. Again, in our group training, I have a pretty in-depth video on how to do this with the least amount of stress possible. I was scheduling up to 100 kids a semester, and I found there's some best practices to make that go smoothly. And it got to the point where when I was building a new schedule at the beginning of the school year, I could do it in about 90 minutes, even with 100 kids. So I teach how to do that there. So that's step 1, 2, and 3. Again, just to be helpful here, figure out your start date, work backwards from there, get your kind of internal marketing sequence up and running so that parents convert over, and then schedule those kids. And really, I guess step 4 would be have that first lesson. And that's where I want to go to my seventh point. The seventh thing you need to think about as you're thinking about this group program. And that is to define what's possible. to get a handle on what the numbers will be. Now, I'm not talking about, wishful thinking or making a dream board or, any kind of stuff like that. I mean, literally, most people I talk to haven't done the math of it, so they're not even sure what their goal actually is. So really it boils down to this. If you know how many students you're going to have in a group, and you know how many students you have or hope to have, it's simply a matter of saying, okay, I'm going to have 4 kids in the group. I want to have 80 students. So I guess 4 into 80, I'm going to be working 20 hours a week. Another thing that you should consider, because if you're thinking about income more than you're thinking about time, think about the number of students that you want to see and the amount of time that you want to see them, and then multiply that number by the amount that you charge per month. So just to keep it easy, if you're seeing 80 students and you charge $100 a month for lessons, you're going to be making $8,000 a month. So just some simple math there, but it's actually kind of surprising me the number of people who haven't thought through that prior to talking to me, or they're not quite sure what's possible, or they're not quite sure how they're all going to make it work. But it kind of comes down to that. So kind of imagining what that future would be. And for me, I started Mondays at 3:20 in the afternoon. I'd have my first hour slot. I'd have a 5-minute gap between group 1 and group 2. So my next group would start at 4:25. My third group would start at 5:30. My fourth group would start at 6:35. And I literally did that 4 nights a week, so 16 groups. Had a couple homeschool groups during the day, and I'd have 1 or 2 groups on Friday. Most parents didn't want to have lessons on a Friday night, so I just stopped pushing that after a while. And really my last group usually ended around 4:25 on a Friday night. No one wanted 5:30 or later because they were doing some, it was like family game night or pizza night or something like that. So a lot of times I could fit 18 groups in my normal schedule throughout the week, and then I would have a couple, depending on the semester or the year, who was in my clientele at the time, I would have a couple homeschool groups during the day. So just thinking these things out, thinking about the numbers, thinking about what's possible, depending on the number of kids you have per group, really just think about that, write that down. I think it can be motivational and can help you get a sense of what the future could be like and what might be possible if you were to convert to a system like this. So my challenge for you would be this. I've given you these 7 points. Go back through. Maybe you've been writing things down or just jotting a few notes as you watch this video, but maybe go back through the video, and for each of these points, maybe just write a sentence or two in terms of the decision that you want to make about each of these. So do you have space? Check. What age range do you want to work with? Write that down. And I'd just say, send an email to me. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention something that could make this a lot easier for you. As I mentioned, I've worked with about 400 studios over the past 5 years, helping them convert to group, and we've really got it down to a science now. We've helped people through our group training called Successful Group Lessons. And if you have interest in going through that, it gives you a blueprint for starting a group studio, and we go really, really in depth on all the things that I learned over the years in each one of these topics, and actually a lot more. And something that we didn't cover in today's video, which is the educational component. Obviously, knowing how to set the group program up is a big component of getting it started. But what about once it's started? What do you do there? So the bulk of this training is really on how to get results with the kids, how to change your teaching style so that it works for a multi-level group, and a lot of other wisdom and best practices that I picked up over the years, and a lot of observation videos where I actually show you how I taught group in my own studio, and you can actually see what I do, see how I get kids to sight read perfectly by the end of their second lesson with pretty much a 100% success rate. And I actually even put like a commentary track over the teaching videos so that you can understand why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. So a lot of value there, and can really help you as you get your group program up and running, especially if you're going to run a multi-level group, which again, as I mentioned throughout the video, I really recommend that for a studio that's under 100 students. So has this video been helpful? I hope so. If it has, write it in a comment down below. If you have a question about anything I've said here, please leave that in a comment as well. Or shoot me an email, daniel@growyourmusicstudio.com. Would love to hear if this video was helpful for you. And if you have interest in checking out our group training, there'll be something on this page that will direct you to more information about that.